If it's Tuesday, Donald Trump's Hail Mary motion for a mistrial in his criminal hush money case is denied as adult film star Stormy Daniels takes the stand, giving jurors lurid and graphic details of her alleged affair with the former president and the hush money payments that followed. Plus, Israeli tanks are seen in southern Gaza as the IDF takes control of a key border crossing in Rafah, with ceasefire talks at a make-or-break moment. And President Biden warns of a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism as he delivers remarks at a Holocaust remembrance ceremony on Capitol Hill, decrying the mass murder of Jews and drawing parallels with Hamas's October 7th attack. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington on another dramatic day in Donald Trump's hush money trial. As Stormy Daniels, the recipient of the hush money payments at the heart of the case, took the stand. Right now, the defense is cross-examining Daniels, with attorneys trying to depict her as vindictive and out to get Donald Trump. The adult film actress has been testifying for much of the day, telling jurors in graphic detail about her alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump in 2006. She also testified about the money she received to stay silent amid the Trump campaign's scramble to protect their candidate's image following the release of the Access Hollywood tape. The graphic nature of Daniels' testimony led Mr. Trump's attorney to seek a mistrial, arguing that it was out of bounds and tainted the jury with lurid details irrelevant to the case. The former president's lawyers pleaded with the judge, quote, "This is the kind of testimony that makes it impossible to come back from." Judge Juan Merchan denied the motion for a mistrial, but he did acknowledge that some of Ms. Daniels' testimony was extraneous and would be stricken from the record. This all came just hours after the former president lashed out on social media about what would unfold in the courtroom today, posting and then deleting, quote, "I've just recently been told who the witness is today. This is unprecedented. No time for lawyers to prepare. No judge has ever run a trial in such a biased and partisan way. He is crooked and highly conflicted. Even taking away my First Amendment rights and me with jail, and Mr. Trump barred from making public statements about witnesses in the case." Just yesterday, Judge Merchan held Donald Trump in criminal contempt for a 10th time, while also using his strongest language yet in threatening to put the former president and current Republican frontrunner in jail for continuing to violate that order. For more now, I'm joined by NBC News correspondent Rahema Ellis outside the courthouse in Manhattan, and with me here in Washington is NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. And I'm also joined by Danny Savalos, a criminal defense attorney and an NBC News legal analyst, as well as Catherine Christian, a former assistant district attorney in Manhattan and also an NBC News legal analyst. Thank you all so much for joining us. Rahema, I want to start with you in New York. Walk us through the key moments in court today. There were a lot of them.
Yeah, there were, which you mentioned some of them. And one of the things that was important, as you mentioned, the defense was very upset with the prosecution, in their words, having been allowed to enter the kind of salacious and spicy detail that Stormy Daniels did when she was on direct examination. You pointed out they wanted a mistrial. The judge said no to that. And he said you have an opportunity for relief on cross-examination. That cross-examination has been going on now for about an hour, and the defense has been doing everything in its power to try and discredit Stormy Daniels altogether. When one point they're saying, isn't it true, this is from the defense, that you hope Donald Trump is convicted so you won't have to pay him more than $500,000 you owe him. That's in reference to her having filed a defamation suit against Donald Trump, lost, and been told to pay nearly $500,000. Daniels says, I hope I don't have to pay him no matter what happens. And then the defense said, you claimed you had sex with him. And she says in the book, yes. The defense says, you've been making money by saying you had sex with Trump for more than a decade. And that story, you just made a lot of money. She says, it has also cost me a lot of money telling my story. The defense is doing everything it can to try to discredit her, to make the jury have the notion that the sex didn't even happen, that she is out to gain money from him more than she is out to tell the truth.
And Rahema, quite the day in court, and we're told that it's not over yet. The court is in a short break for a few minutes at least. But I want to ask you, what so far has been Donald Trump's reaction to all the testimony today?
Well, at some points he has had his eyes closed, and that's been something that he's been doing throughout this trial. He says at times it's just him closing his beautiful blue eyes. Can't make much out of it, but it is something that he's done. People have also said that there was a point when he leaned over to try and get a glimpse of Stormy Daniels as she was sitting in the witness chair, and that when she walked into the room at one point, he looked up at her from his seated position, and then he looked down. But he hasn't said anything objectionable that would lead him to elicit a comment from the judge whatsoever.
Rahima Ellis, live for us in Manhattan. Rahima, thank you. And now I want to bring in Jonathan Allen here with me on set. Jonathan, look, Trump's post on social media this morning, and the defense's motion for mistrial, it suggests that Trump world really isn't happy with the way things are going. But what do you think? What do you think Trump world is? What's their reaction at this point?
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on here. Number one, we saw him post and then delete earlier today, right? So there's obviously...
Has Donald Trump ever deleted something before?
I don't know, but there's obviously some deference to the idea that he could actually get himself thrown in jail. So that's number one. In terms of the motion for a mistrial, I think they're trying to set up grounds for an appeal later by having the judge reject the mistrial on the basis of Stormy Daniels having included some of those prurient details. The defense objected when the testimony went in. The judge sustained those objections most of the time, and he even admonished the defense and said, there were times when you should have objected and you didn't. And he said, I stepped in at one point for you. So that's part of what's going on. And in my conversations with Trump aides, campaign aides, they're reluctant to talk about this. And I think part of it is, and I asked specifically about the testimony today, part of that is, I think, they don't want to get him in more trouble with this judge. So the idea that he wants to go to jail, I think, is a little misguided. Okay. The idea that he understands on how to capitalize on that if it happens, I think, is relevant. And also, he's playing a game where he wants to, if he gets thrown in jail, he wants it to be because the judge has overreached.
And I want to pick up on that. You know, you just mentioned the deference to the idea of going to jail, and you're just saying that the idea that he actually wants to go might be misguided. Talk to me a little bit about that. There is this perception that, you know, Donald Trump basically seems to be thumbing his nose at the court here. He could stand to benefit, at least in the short term, of fundraising and whatnot from, you know, from being thrown in jail. So you think he doesn't really want to end up there?
I've never spent a night in Rikers Island. I certainly don't want to. I don't think you want to. Donald Trump has spent most of his life living in the lap of luxury. And whatever the political benefit, I think the idea of being caged in a cell is something that doesn't appeal to him. If it happens, he will make political hay of it. But again, I think he's playing a game where he wants to ensure that if that happens, it's not because he's overdone it, but because the judge is seen by the broader public as overreaching.
And on that point, how far do you think that Donald Trump and his team might push the envelope here?
Not much farther.
You really think so?
I mean, look, the judge has warned him about incarceration now in very stark terms. And I don't think they've got a lot further they can go.
We still have weeks to go on this trial, though. You know, what's next?
Well, what's next? One thing I would say is we've had these objections from the prosecutors to the things that Trump has said, where they've basically come to the judge and said, this violates the gag order. What we're not seeing so far is additional material after the first set of fines he got. So this second group that the judge ruled on, which had one additional violation, had happened before the first, the first 9 were ruled on. It strikes me that Trump is trying to walk the line and not actually overshoot it.
John, you've been covering politics a long time. Did you ever think that just months away from an election, we would be hearing about the alleged affair in lurid detail in a court proceeding with the GOP frontrunner? Put this in perspective for us. I mean, what are we living through here?
Well, there's two perspectives. You certainly wouldn't expect to see this in a courtroom, right? To see the former president of the United States sitting in, what effectively looks like traffic court, this sort of beat-up old building with, wood paneling that's been scratched up. I mean, it's very sort of jarring to see that. I've been in the courtroom with him, and it's highly unusual. On the other hand, in the long history of American politics, there have been candidates who have tried to hide a wide variety of actions, some scandalous, some sexual, sexual and scandalous. In this case, Donald Trump says that the affair never happened. His lawyers are now arguing that never happened, but you could never have fully predicted to have this moment. And again, we're watching this trial. What's interesting, I think, is that the other trials look like they may not happen before the election. So you're talking about maybe more substantive stuff in terms of trying to overturn the election in the classified documents case.
And Jonathan Allen, we want to take a break here as we're looking at those live pictures of Donald Trump heading back into the courtroom. We understand they were in a short break. Now court is resuming. But Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us here on set. We really appreciate it. I want to turn now for the legal perspective to Catherine. Aside from the salaciousness, how did Stormy Daniels' testimony today fit into the prosecution's case?
Well, it was, in my view, overly salacious, according to the judge. But what they were trying to do, the prosecutors, were to demonstrate why it was so important for Donald Trump to silence Miss Daniels. The Access Hollywood tape hits, and then is he going to really want this woman out there saying what she testified to today? No, because that in combination with the Access Hollywood tape would just be too much. And he needed to keep that away from the electorate, the voting public. So that's what the prosecution was doing. But it appears that actually Ms. Daniels were saying things beyond than what she was being asked. And that's what was getting the judge upset, and that was causing the objections. So the prosecution's role today, they were hoping, it fits into their theory that this woman had to be silenced because it would hurt his chances being elected.
Danny, what do you make of the defense's cross-examination so far? Is it a good idea to come after Stormy Daniels as viciously as they have so far?
Cross-examination is cross-examination. It's the crucible. It's not a pleasant place to be. And sometimes the circumstances require you to go after a witness and not treat them kindly. Is Stormy Daniels that witness? Maybe. That remains to be seen. But it's a style choice. I mean, you could get up there and just do a very sort of low-key cross-examination of Stormy Daniels. But I think the defense is banking on her getting agitated and saying things that aren't helpful to the prosecution. She's already doing that to some degree. She's doing something that is really problematic, no matter whose witness it is, prosecution or defense. She's going beyond the question asked. That doesn't help the prosecution at all. I think she thinks she's helping the prosecution, and witnesses like that are really dangerous because they start adding on, and maybe they aren't too concerned about being consistent with their prior statements. So that can be a real issue. And I think the defense may even be trying to do that, trying to goad her a little into maybe getting emotional, maybe giving some ill-advised answers. So that may be part of the strategy. But believe me, there's no requirement that the defense treat a witness with kid gloves. If the circumstances call for it, you've got to go after that witness in cross-examination. It's not a pleasant place to be.
And so, Danny, if you think, Daniels is going too far in her answers, what do you make of the defense's request for a mistrial here? Was that a good strategy? Would you have done it?
Yes, I would have. The only X factor, the question that is still unanswered for me, is why didn't they object throughout this testimony that was damaging? Here's what we know. The judge thought it was too much. He said so. We know the defense thought as much. They asked for a mistrial. But even the judge wondered, why didn't you say something? Where were the objections? And to that answer, I genuinely don't know. I knew the mistrial would be denied. This may be an issue on appeal if Trump is convicted. But the judge pointed out something very important, is that if they weren't objecting, then they may not have preserved their right to appeal on those particular issues. But yes, I thought the testimony went too far. We started getting into sexual positions, which is, I mean, if it wasn't so true, it would be laughable because it's just not necessary. The only thing that was necessary was Stormy Daniels saying we had sex, or of course we didn't have sex. And then they got into a lot of lurid details that I think the defense had a good point. It was damaging to the defendant in a way that was prejudicial. Now, I'm a defense attorney, so take that with a block of salt. But I think that was a fair argument to make. I was not surprised that the motion was denied.
Yeah, quite the testimony today so far. Danny, Catherine, I want to turn to you. Judge Merchan suggested that some of Stormy Daniels' testimony might be stricken from the record. So how much of it do you think could be at risk?
Well, probably the positions, the use of the condom, things that was very salacious, that are not, quite frankly, relevant and too prejudicial. So all of that really should be stricken from the record. And the detail, I'm wondering now, the defense wanted all of that because, as we can see, or as we're reading, the cross-examination is blistering. Susan Neckles is an excellent cross-examiner. cross-examine her, and she's showing Ms. Daniels bias and hostility toward Mr. Trump. She even said she hates Mr. Trump. She's showing all the prior inconsistent statements. So maybe part of the strategy for the defense of not objecting was to let her go on and, be like, very detailed and then attack her on cross. But a lot of what she said that had absolutely nothing to do with this case should be stricken.
So, Catherine, how does that work? Because, yes, if this information, if this testimony is stricken from the record, what is the jury to do? Are they just supposed to magically forget what they heard?
Well, that's funny. We always say you can't unring a bell, but they're all trials all the time. Judges will say, now, what you heard, that's been stricken from the record. You are not to consider that during your deliberations. Stricken from the record means if the jury asks for the transcript to be played, to be read back to them, they're not going to hear that part that's stricken. So that's really why it's important. It's not part of the record anymore.
And quickly, before I switch to some of what Donald Trump said outside the courtroom, do you think that the defense had a point here for a mistrial? Do you think they had an argument?
Oh, you do? Yes, they do. And I agree with
argument.
Danny. They did it for the appeal, to make sure if he is convicted, they have grounds for an appeal.
And Catherine, so we showed Mr. Trump's Truth Social post a little earlier. He referred to a witness today. Do you think his comments today violated that gag order?
It came very close, which is why I'm sure his lawyer said, pull that down immediately, because he started with that, then he went after the judge. Whatever he says about the judge, he can do, but he came very close to violating it. No, he's not going to jail for that post. But it came very close.
Well, I don't know, Danny, Trump took down the post, but is the cat already out of the bag here?
Yeah, I wonder if that's one of the pieces of evidence. Really, the government, or excuse me, the people might move for a hearing on a gag order violation. It's up to them. It's up to them in their office to sit around and say, well, do we think he violated? Do we really want to do a hearing on this issue? Now, keep in mind, the people already moved for a gag order hearing because Donald Trump said David Pecker was nice. So I think we have an idea where they stand on asking for gag order violation hearings. They're very willing to do it on close calls, and they're very willing to lose if it means they can get before the judge for a hearing. So this could be something that people will move on. They probably just don't have any time today because they're busy on trial, just like the defense counsel is too busy to be dealing with gag order violations. So I do expect there's a possibility that people might move for a violation hearing. And I think this is just too close a call. But I wonder if taking it down might be evidence of what we call consciousness of guilt. Who knows?
And Catherine, prosecutors have indicated that they're more than halfway through witness testimony already. Are you surprised that this trial has progressed as quickly as it has?
No, and I think a lot of credit goes to the judge for, first of all, picking that jury in an extraordinary amount of time, and also the prosecutors have their witnesses ready and moving. And remember, the next 2 weeks are 3 days. There's no trial tomorrow. Next week is a 3-day work week, and the week after that, because Memorial Day is a 3-day work week. So 2 weeks, it's actually much less. And I think this is extraordinary pace for the part of the prosecution with the help of the judge.
And Danny, same question to you. Does a quick trial here benefit either side more than the other?
I think it benefits the prosecution moving quickly. I mean, when you're on the defense, there's nothing more disorienting than when the prosecution is just ripping through witnesses and it feels like you don't have time to prepare. Keep in mind also that they're not getting the list until the last minute. So I imagine this keeps the defense on their heels when you're moving this quickly. I mean, sometimes in a trial, if you finish with a witness too quickly, the other side just may not even be ready. I mean, they're ready in the sense they've been prepped, but it really can throw off the defense. And I wonder if this speed is having that same effect on the defense. It would affect me that way.
Danny Savalos, Catherine Christian, thank you so much for joining us and for bringing us your expertise. We really appreciate it. And coming up, a live report from Tel Aviv after a night of Israeli bombardment in southern Gaza. We have the details on the IDF's latest military operation and what it means for today's high-stakes round of ceasefire negotiations. Next. Plus, marking the moment, President Biden remembers the atrocities of the Holocaust and draws parallels to the horrors of October 7th. His message is straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. As negotiators in Cairo continue to work towards a ceasefire agreement, Israel says it has now taken control over a key border crossing into southern Gaza. Video released by the IDF shows Israeli tanks entering the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing, choking off critical humanitarian aid into the enclave and drawing criticisms from the UN and leaders in the region. Israel described the ground incursion into Rafah as a, quote, precise counterterrorism operation based on intel, indicating the border crossing was being used by Hamas. Meanwhile, negotiators in Cairo, including Israeli mediators and CIA Director Bill Burns, continue to try to salvage the latest ceasefire proposal. An Israeli official telling NBC News that one of the key disagreements between Israel and Hamas is whether the 33 hostages released in the first phase of the deal would be living hostages or the bodies of hostages who have been killed. Joining me now is Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. Raf, what should we make of the IDF's movement on the ground around Rafah, and how much of this is in anticipation for a ground offensive versus putting pressure on Hamas amid those ceasefire talks?
So, Gabe, as you know, the Israeli government has been threatening an all-out ground offensive in Rafah for months now. That's despite opposition from the Biden administration. An Israeli official tells us that what is going on right now is not that large-scale ground offensive. They are saying this is a limited operation. It's designed to seize control of the Rafah crossing and, exactly as you said, to put pressure on Hamas at the negotiating table. Now, around 23 people have been killed inside Gaza in the fighting so far, according to the health ministry. We don't know how many of those are civilians and how many of them are militants, but we do know that the Rafah crossing is now closed. And of course, that has been such a vital lifeline for humanitarian aid flowing from Egypt into Gaza. The Kerem Shalom crossing, which is just to the east, has also been closed since Sunday, when Hamas fired a number of rockets from Gaza towards the general Kerem Shalom area, not specifically at the crossing, and killed 4 Israeli soldiers. The IDF is saying Hamas fired more rockets today in the area of Kerem Shalom. But when President Biden spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu on Monday, the Israeli leader assured him Israel would reopen Kerem Shalom. The State Department is saying they believe the Israelis will do so in the next 24 hours or so. We'll see if that happens. But the UN and other aid agencies warning that if they don't get that aid flowing again soon, we will plunge straight back into crisis.
You know, Raf, you've been covering this since the beginning. And look, you just said that Israel is now saying that this was not the large-scale ground offensive that many around the world, including the Biden administration, have been fearing. And today we heard from the White House essentially saying that same thing. But, Raf, as you well know, the White House, the Biden administration, was basically saying they didn't want any incursion at all into Rafah. At this point, from your perspective down there on the ground in Tel Aviv, is Israel listening to the United States?
You know, it doesn't seem so, Gabe. They have not, as you said, launched the all-out ground offensive, but the U.S. has been very clear. It's deeply concerned about any Israeli military activity that disrupts the flow of aid. One of the top priorities when Secretary Blinken was here in the region the other week is trying to get enough aid into Gaza to fend off what Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, now says is full-blown famine in the north of the Strip. The U.S. has put a lot of pressure on Israel to open up new crossings into the north of Gaza, to allow for the construction of that temporary pier by the U.S. military. But the fundamental here, Gabe, is that those crossings down in the south, Rafah and Kerem Shalom, are the absolute core lifelines. And if those are closed, you can't really supplement it with that small crossing in the north, and you can't really supplement it with that pier, which at this point isn't open. Gabe.
Raf Sanchez live for us in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you so much for your reporting. And we want to turn now to Washington, where President Biden addressed the ongoing hostage talks during his keynote address at the U.S. Holocaust Museum's Day of Remembrance. In his remarks, the president reaffirming U.S. support for Israel's right to exist as he invoked Hamas's attack on October 7th while condemning rising anti-Semitism.
Now, here we are, not 75 years later, but just 7.5 months later, and people are already forgetting. We're already forgetting that Hamas unleashed this terror. It was Hamas that brutalized Israelis. It was Hamas who took and continues to hold hostages. I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget. As Jews around the world still cope with the atrocities and trauma of that day and its aftermath, we've seen a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world.
The president also addressed incident of anti-Semitism on college campuses amid weeks of protests over the Israel-Hamas war. And joining me now is my White House colleague Monica Alba. And Monica, the president made repeated references to the ongoing hostage talks in today's speech. So how much did the uncertainty around those talks influence the direction of today's speech?
Yeah, the White House has been so careful around the sensitivity of these ongoing negotiations, Gabe, that they wanted to be certain that there's nothing the president or a spokesperson could say at this fragile moment that could derail or really influence anything in the direction other than hopefully trying to get the deal that they have been pursuing. Now, this speech was in the works for some time. It was announced last week, and they knew that there was this possibility on the table that there could be a potential ceasefire deal in exchange for the release of the hostages held in Gaza. And we were really told and understood that the purpose of today's speech was to focus more on that Holocaust memorial ceremony and to really talk more broadly about the rise in anti-Semitism. And that, of course, when we're talking about the atrocities of October 7th, you can't ignore what's currently happening right now with the war in Gaza and everything that's happened in the last 7.5 months. But the aim for today was for it to not be a political speech and for it not to be any kind of a foreign policy speech that would disrupt what is currently ongoing. And that's why the president really repeated his call that if people do want to be protesting and expressing their opinions on the war, they should do that peacefully. But anything that veers into the violent or that is a behavior or rhetoric that is hateful or violent or anti-Semitic specifically, he said that that is completely inappropriate. And that is how all of these storylines are sort of converging when you think about the campus protests, the war, and the ongoing negotiations.
Yeah, and he made that message. He had that message last week. He made it more forcefully today once again. And Monica, the White House has rolled out some actions to counter anti-Semitism. What other actions is the administration considering at this point?
And this was a part of the larger strategy to try to really combat anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, not just on college campuses, but nationwide. And that's something that the Biden administration has poured a lot of resources into. Now, the Department of Education is saying that they're looking at some additional potential tools that could help with this. But there's also the question of legislation, Gabe. And we know that there was a piece that was introduced by lawmakers that would specifically tackle this and could introduce the idea of expanding the definition of anti-Semitism on college campuses. That passed the House recently. It's unclear where it goes from here. It has a legislative hurdle. Obviously, it needs to clear in the Senate before going back. And there are some objections raised by both Democrats and Republicans, some tweaks they would like to see to the bill before it passes. But it would also potentially raise the question of whether federal funding to certain universities that have incidents of anti-Semitism could be halted or could be altered. And so those questions are still being navigated right now on Capitol Hill. But the White House has said that it would get behind potentially one of these pieces of legislation. There's another bill that tackles it similarly, but from a different group of lawmakers that's also being discussed. Gabe.
Monica Alba, live for us outside the White House. Monica, thank you. And up next, not backing down, Speaker Johnson meets with Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene for the second time in as many days, as he tries to avoid a messy floor vote to keep his speakership. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning to Capitol Hill, another day, another meeting between Speaker Mike Johnson and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, as she keeps up her threat to call for his ouster. In an interview this morning, Greene laid out her demands for the speaker, including defunding special counsel Jack Smith. Greene says she will not compromise, even though she lacks the votes to actually oust the speaker. But if she goes through with it, she would put him in the awkward position of needing support from Democrats to stay in power. As for Speaker Johnson, he said talks with the Congresswoman are not a negotiation, and on the way out of their discussion today, called the talks, quote, very productive. Joining me now on set is Benjy Sarlin, Washington bureau chief for Semaphore, Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign advisor, Ameshia Cross, and Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, as well as an NBC News political analyst. Thank you all so much for joining us here on the panel. And Benjy, I want to start with you. Why is Speaker Johnson giving Marjorie Taylor Greene so much attention here? She doesn't have the votes.
Well, this has been often the way that Speaker Johnson operates. In fact, it's one of the reasons it's actually caused him trouble, I'd say, at various points, which is his philosophy is you speak to everyone. This is always a fractious Republican conference. You always have to talk to all the members individually. At times, it's created problems because it's raised expectations among whoever the last person he talked to that they're actually considering a proposal that he may or may not actually be considering. You know, during the Ukraine aid dispute, this was a frequent thing. Whoever met with him last would come out thinking, well, he agrees with us. But now we're seeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think he's humoring her.
Humoring her, but isn't by giving her, but even by humoring her, is he just not giving her more oxygen here?
I mean, in some ways, yes. If you see the images outside the Capitol today, there's like 100 reporters following her at any given moment right now. She has as much attention as ever, breaking out even with all these other news stories going on right now. But he's also operating from a position of strength now. Unlike Kevin McCarthy earlier when he was dealing with his own rebellion, he knows she doesn't have the votes. Democrats have already said they will back him up, and there's not a lot of people joining Marjorie Taylor Greene at the moment.
And as you like to point out, though, there is a bipartisan governing coalition right now here in the House. No one wants to admit it, though.
Yeah, it's all about kind of face-saving maneuvers to avoid this, but it's as close to admitted as it is now. People know that Speaker Johnson only serves as Speaker because he can count on Democrats to back him up, and they're hoping to avoid a vote like this, which would make it very plain, in which Democrats have to literally line up and vote for him. But yes, that is the case.
Brendan, I want to play some of what Congresswoman Greene said this afternoon. Let's listen.
I am so done with words. For me, it's all about actions. And that's all the American people care about. At this point, all they have seen from politicians is promises after promises and nothing but broken promises. And I feel the same way. I genuinely feel the same way the American people do. I want to see actions. And so I walked out of that meeting. I mean, obviously, you can't make things happen instantly. And we all are aware and understanding of that. So now the ball is in his court, and he's supposed to be reaching out to us hopefully soon.
Brendan, you've advised House speakers before. Same question I asked Benjy. Why is Speaker Johnson giving her the time of day here?
Well, I think he wants to avoid the vote. I mean, Benjy said, this is not a vote anybody wants to have. You know, even Democrats probably don't want to have to vote to save Mike Johnson. It sounds like we might be actually reaching a place where everybody is sort of backing away and saying we may not do this. She's getting what she wants, which is attention. She's getting the fact that she gets to walk out of the Capitol and have 100 reporters chase her down. And if she backs away now and kind of holds this over, it sounds like what she wants to do is say, I'm not going to do it now, but I'm reserving the right at any time in the future if I feel like it, I want to. Which may be the best for everybody. Johnson gets to continue moving along, and she gets to have people following her around for the next 6 months.
Which is clearly what she wants. Ameshia, I want to bring this to you. Do Democrats really want to save Mike Johnson?
Democrats want the American government to function. And I think that when we saw Mike Johnson come through on bills that were supportive of Israel as well as being supportive of Ukraine, that made a difference. Because we know that this Congress has been the Republican side of the congressional items have been very difficult to get across the aisle, specifically when it comes to some of these funding measures. So I think that Democrats are weighing that. But they also recognize that it could be a double-edged sword. We just saw Mike Johnson come out earlier today, basically feeding into the Trump narrative that the criminal case that he's in is something that is fueled by a weaponized Biden administration. So I do think that there are some things that are problematic here. Yeah, and look, if the tables were turned, would Republicans ever help out a Democratic House Speaker? And, you know, that's the argument that some progressive Democrats are saying. Exactly. So what do you make of that argument? They're looking forward to, obviously, the election in November. They're trying to, because we do have several things that are happening right now that the Biden administration needs to get across, specifically while we're watching wars across the Middle East. But I do think that if the tables were turned, Republicans absolutely would be willing to basically have American democracy on the line and not support a Democrat if the shoe was on the other foot. Right. And Benjy, I want to turn now to the Veep stakes. You know, Donald Trump is probably weeks away, you know, possibly 2 months from picking a vice president at this point, but the jockeying has already begun. I want to play what Tim Scott had to say on Fox yesterday. Listen.
There is no place for Jewish people in the Democrat Party if you do not want to be associated with a party of hate. There's no place for good Americans, for patriots, for African Americans, Hispanics. There's no place in the Democrat Party if you want to stand against anti-Semitism and stand for the American way, to stand for fairness and justice. You must join the GOP.
That is some pretty inflammatory stuff. Is he basically making those comments for an audience of one?
Pretty much. I mean, Tim Scott has not sounded exactly like himself ever since these Veep stakes have started. I mean, it's one of the most important parts of the job for being Trump's running mate. Is you're going to have to sit there and kind of silently chuckle along while he says outrageous things that Republicans mostly don't want to defend. That was the running joke about Mike Pence before January 6th, that was his primary job often. You know, it's not that he himself would repeat, you know, some of what Trump said, but usually that he would give some kind of defense for it or minimize it. So in this case, it's Trump has repeatedly said inflammatory things about Jewish voters, saying that they're ungrateful, that no real Jewish person can vote for Democrats, and you're starting to see that's not Tim Scott normally.
And picking up on that point, Brendan, I want to play what Tim Scott said when he launched his presidential campaign. Let's listen to that.
We need a president who persuades not just our friends and our base. We need a president that persuades. We have to do that with common sense, conservative principles, but we have to have a compassion for people. We have to have a compassion for people who don't agree with us.
Very different message there. Do you have to shed your principles to get on board the MAGA train here?
Well, the irony is that as he's trying to position himself to be chosen by Donald Trump, he's making himself a much less interesting candidate to actually support Donald Trump. I mean, the reason you might want to pick someone like Tim Scott is because he is a sort of different kind of Republican. He can broaden the party. He can appeal to lots of people, and he isn't just spouting the Trump-like rhetoric. But if that's all he is, then I don't know exactly what you're gaining by adding him. Just because he's African-American doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to get a whole new crop of voters. You could have Ben Carson in that spot, and I don't know that you're appealing to anybody else. So I hope that he doesn't completely lose track of who he is and what made him so appealing to so many people in the first place.
And Ameshia, I want to turn now to this vice presidential selection process. He hosted many of these VP hopefuls at this RNC retreat over the weekend in Florida. 5 of them did Sunday show interviews. Is he just loving all this attention?
He absolutely is. I don't think that these are real auditions. He needs some of these voices in order to help his fundraising, because we already know that the RNC and the Trump campaign is behind in that. But I agree with a lot of what Brendan just said, because traditionally speaking, everyone votes for the top of the ticket anyway. The vice president doesn't really move the needle that much for voters. But if you have someone who has so many negatives when it comes to expanding their base, as Donald Trump absolutely has, then it would make sense that he would choose someone who would be able to bring on more moderate voters, swing state voters, women voters. And I would have argued before, Tim Scott decided to take a full 180 that he might have been one of those people. But if you're just going to sing the same tune as Donald Trump, then you're not expanding to anything.
We're running low on time here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the lead story of the day, this trial that we're watching in Manhattan, the testimony from Stormy Daniels today, and also the possibility that the GOP frontrunner could, if he's not careful, end up in jail. What do you think would be the reaction from Democrats? Is that an image that they really want at this point? Does it benefit them politically at all?
If we're looking at the polls, there are several people who aren't necessarily bothered by a Trump conviction. I think that that's more scary than anything else. Does it help them politically? Joe Biden has to go after the Democratic base. We know that there are fractures within the base and base voters in terms of turnout, and that is his primary concern as well.
Brendan, I want to end with you here. What happens if Donald Trump goes to jail? What would be the Republican voter response? Does the reasons matter why he goes to jail, or is the image paramount?
I think the fact that we're even sort of questioning whether this is going to be a big deal says a lot about where we are. The Republican nominee for President of the United States could be going to jail, and we're not quite sure what the politics are going to be. I mean, that's remarkable. It kind of tests this notion like nothing matters. It may not matter. It may rile up some, assuming it's only a short period of time, it may rile up some Republicans. We don't know how Democrats will handle it because they haven't quite figured out how to handle the whole trial in the first place. So we may be right back where we were a week ago like it never happened.
And that is a good way to end this panel. 2024, what a wild ride indeed. Thank you all so much. Benjy, Ameshia, Brendan, thank you all. And after the break, what is next for U.S.-Israel relations as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces backlash from Arab leaders and the UN for striking southern Gaza? Ambassador Dennis Ross, a top envoy to the Mideast for multiple presidents, is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Turning back to the Middle East and the reaction after Hamas announced yesterday that it was agreeing to a ceasefire framework brokered by the Qatari and Egyptian negotiators. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that announcement was an attempt by Hamas to, quote, sabotage Israel's planned military offensive into Rafah. And joining me now is Ambassador Dennis Ross, former special assistant to President Obama and an NBC News foreign affairs analyst. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. And as we've reported, one of the key sticking points is whether the hostages released would be alive or dead. How significant of a hurdle is that to reaching a deal?
Well, it's a very fair point, because the Israelis in the proposal they had accepted had reduced the number of hostages who were to be released from 40 to 33. They understood that would be 33 alive hostages. The Hamas counterproposal, which is really what it is, came back and said the 33 would be alive and dead, without a breakdown of how many would be alive. Obviously, that leaves some room for discussion, but it's a pretty significant change from an Israeli standpoint. The aim here to be doing a deal at all is to get hostages back alive. They want to, in the end, they want to get all the bodies back for those who are not alive, but they certainly, the whole idea is to get the hostages released and to have them recovered alive. So that's one of the big differences, I think, in this counterproposal. There's some others as well. Yeah. Hamas was saying they would release the hostages only 3 every 7 days. Israel, the proposal Israel had accepted was 3 hostages released every 3 days. Another one was that the Israelis would be able to, they would have a veto over some of the Palestinian prisoners who would be released in return. Hamas was saying no veto over any prisoners. So there's a series of different positions that Hamas was responding with.
And I want to go back to that point, though. It's a heartbreaking discussion to have, isn't it? Is that a point Israel should concede on? Are some living hostages better than none? Is getting back some of those hostages, better than nothing at this point, Ambassador?
Well, I think the question becomes, is there negotiating room here? There's a series of different issues. This is obviously the most prominent one, but not the only one. And you have the U.S. trying to broker this along with the Egyptians and the Qataris. There should be an effort to see if you can bridge the differences. Look, I think the Israelis want to get back any hostages they can get alive right now, but they're not going to consistently be in a position where they accept one set of proposals. By the way, when they accepted this position, you had Secretary Blinken say the Israeli position was extraordinarily generous. Now, what they're facing is a position that has them get less than what they were prepared to accept. So it does look like it's a negotiation. And I think from the Israeli standpoint, certainly from the standpoint of the families, they want them all out. They want them all out now. And they're prepared, from their standpoint, to say, do whatever it takes to get them. It's pretty clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu has limits on what he's prepared to accept.
Ambassador, today the White House said that it was confident that there was a possibility here that the gaps could be closed in these negotiations. John Kirby seemed at least optimistic that that could happen. But what about if Hamas is asking to stay in power in some form? Israel has repeatedly said that is not acceptable. Is Israel ever going to go for that?
I'm not sure Israel's going to go for that. Honestly, I'm not sure that we will go for that. I don't think the American position is that Hamas should be in power when this is over. But there are a variety of ways to produce that as an outcome. First, what's the most important objective? The most important objective is the demilitarization of Gaza so that Gaza can never again be a platform for attacks. Secondly, Hamas can't be in control. In a sense, what you could do is you could basically we could develop mechanisms that would make sure there could be no remilitarization. And any reconstruction, by the way, reconstruction is one element of the proposal. Any reconstruction would be conditioned on Hamas cannot be in power, because there'll be nobody who's prepared to invest in Gaza if Hamas remains in power, knowing they would do this again.
And Ambassador, we also learned, according to NBC News reporting, citing 2 senior administration officials, that last week the White House halted a shipment of offensive weapons to Israel. They maintain it's not a shift in policy, but what do you make of that move by the Biden administration, and do you view it as a change in policy?
I'm not sure it is a change in policy if, in fact, it's a very deliberate effort. If it is, I'll put it this way, if it's a very deliberate effort to stop the resupply of the Israelis, then it's a change in policy. I do think it may be caught up in a combination of logistic considerations, because there are some challenges we're facing, but also there is the question of this Israeli unit that we found to be engaging in excessive behavior. That was the language I think that was used. And we were talking about possibly sanctioning this particular Israeli unit in the West Bank. I just wonder whether or not what has been reported is caught up and is connected somehow to that, where you'll actually end up with an announcement that we are going ahead with resupply of Israel, but there is this unit that will not be receiving, that will not be eligible to receive any material support from the U.S.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you so much for your expertise. We really appreciate it. And still to come, President Putin's defiant message to Russia and his warning to the West as he begins a historic fifth term in power. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to Russia, where President Vladimir Putin has been sworn in for a fifth term, further tightening his control over the country. The inauguration comes after an effectively uncontested election, which took place just a month after opposition leader Alexei Navalny died in a Russian prison. And that all comes more than 2 years after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which he framed as part of a greater existential conflict with the West in his inauguration speech. At the same time, Russia has also announced plans to hold nuclear weapons drills, an apparent warning to Western allies over their involvement in the war in Ukraine. And joining me now for more is NBC's Matt Bodner. Matt, we heard Putin address the West directly in that speech. How important is this inauguration for the Kremlin, especially given the ongoing war in Ukraine?
Thanks, Gabe. Well, it's interesting. Putin is often talking directly to the West, and so much, I think, of what he does is meant for us to see, and today's inauguration was another great example of that. Of course, much of what he said was directed at the Russian public as well. You know, he talked a lot about the war and a united Russia doing what it needs to do to secure its sovereign and prosperous future. But the message for the West here, I think, is really straightforward. All of your efforts to undermine me have failed, and I'm stronger than ever. We've seen a lot of that from him recently. So I think it's really about continuing this effort by the Kremlin to project this strong and confident face. It helps them a lot right now that the inauguration is falling just 2 days before Victory Day. That would be May 9th, and that's essentially the most sacred holiday in Putin's Russia, commemorating their victory in the Second World War. Interesting this year, once upon a time, the main attraction of that Victory Day parade was Russia's own military hardware, but this year they've actually got a special attraction, including NATO tanks, U.S. Abrams tanks, and we can see, you know, crowds fawning all over this in Moscow. So I think what's really striking to me is the images coming out of Moscow this morning, today, really kind of underscore this trend of militarization in Russian society, and I think, really, to put it simply, just how much Putin has molded his country into his wartime image in just 2 years.
And meanwhile, Matt, a U.S. soldier has been detained in Russia. How does the Kremlin view this, the political opportunity of detentions like this? And do they force conversations between Moscow and Washington, or just increase tensions?
So it's an interesting question. I think they always know that they're going to spark some kind of discussion, and I think that they really do view Americans as targets of opportunity at this point. So with any American they detain, whether or not the charges are legitimate, and I do think it's important to point out there are Americans in Russia who do commit legitimate crimes, but regardless of that fact, it's a chance to get Washington on the phone. I think there's a lot of behind the scenes here that we get very little taste of, even with very prominent cases such as Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter charged with espionage. So these arrests, you know, they do raise tensions. They also force conversations. I think it's just that often these conversations seem to yield few results, at least that we can see in public. Gabe.
Matt Bodner, who has covered Russia extensively for us, live in London for us this afternoon. Matt, thank you so much. And thank you for watching. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Aaron Gilchrist in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.